who are also powerful, but that you are in a very special way the God of the marginals, and that you have on your heart the widow, the orphan, the poor, and especially the alien. And as we continue, Lord, this long trek through your law about the alien, we pray once more for your help, not only in our understanding, but as we try to process this for ourselves and for the world in which we live, which is so full of aliens. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, preaching, and I'm not preaching, I would probably have an opening sermon or story or illustration or slide or something about the number of aliens in the world. To be done. It's reminding ourselves right? You know that? There are probably more aliens in the world today because of displacement, some of it voluntary, a good deal of it involuntary, isn't it? But there are probably more aliens in the world today than there's ever been. So the topic of aliens, while it's an ancient topic embedded in an ancient text, has a great relevance, not only for America as it debates about what it's going to do with aliens, or continues to debate what it's going to do with aliens, but the rest of the world that is just flooded with aliens. If you have the notes, turn with me to remind you where we are. We go at Exodus 12:49, which is the key text, and it says that there's one law. One law for the alien, one law for the native born. And that's really the foundation, that really is the leveler. This one law is talked about in the context of the Passover, which is really the foundation of Israel. That's the great remembrance, that's the great ceremony. I don't know what it would quite be compared to in various cultures, but that's foundational. And the alien is allowed in on the ground floor. The alien can come and make an offering at the tabernacle along with the native born. Absolutely stunning. There's nothing like it in the ancient Near Eastern law codes, nor really in the ancient Near Eastern law practices. It's just stunning. And one of the things that we've tried to do in this class and have not done very well, but at least you are alerted to it, is to try to read this story, which is our story, within the context of the other stories. And it really makes our story different, if it's read right, when it's placed in the context of the other stories. And one of my central theses here is that Israel's witness is constituted in part by the social structure. And so today we're going to look at the laws about the structural realities of being aliens. And it's those structures that would be very obvious. The interpersonal relationships come and go. They're one something a person who starts and dies, they remain. Very briefly, and we'll come to this again today, the alien piece is picked up in the Ten Commandments, fourth commandment, and we'll talk about that. And then we're actually working our way through the Book of the Covenant, which is Exodus 21 through 23, very slowly, emphasis on slowly. And the second half of the Book of the Covenant, we have two literary strings that are headed by the word alien and the word alien. And we're also going to find the word alien down here today in connection with the Sabbath. And then I've arbitrarily, well, not really quite arbitrarily, but somewhat, picked up all the rest of the laws in Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, and arranged them in 6 piles. That doesn't sound very sophisticated, does it? But that's more or less what it comes to. 6 piles. The first pile was a pile of laws about the one law. 4 laws in that. I put them first because they're so very fundamental. The second group which we finished last week, was the interpersonal relationships, the laws spelling out how you as a person relate to other aliens as a person. And there are quite a few of those. Today's group number 3, is going to be the structural ones. What is there about the law of Moses that laid structures how we behave? And then the next one we'll come to today also is the covenant. Then in the next lecture, we'll look at the climax of the discussion in Deuteronomy 26, a very, very significant statement. And then finally, Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 10, which have the unbelievable statement, just unbelievable. You will love the alien as yourself. I think you think you're reading the New Testament, right? No, you're reading Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 10 and Leviticus chapter 19. Absolutely stunning. You love the alien as yourself. Come and we'll. Now, I'm going to read quickly through them. I hope today will be a bit shorter so we'll have time for questions. I have 15 pages and I realized that we're not getting through 15 pages, so I cut it half to 6. Maybe we'll get through 6, who knows. Justice for alien structural laws. Moving beyond interpersonal laws that pertain to aliens, we come to laws that perhaps can best be clustered together under the heading of justice for the alien in structural laws. The laws we now consider very briefly are structural provisions in law for achieving or maintaining or administering justice. And I'm just going to deal with 2 here, namely the cities of and the Israelite calendar, or if you like abstractions, structural justice in space and structural justice in time. All right? The Bible doesn't talk in those categories, and so I'm not really going to talk in those categories. But let's just stop, because this is so sort of different from the way we generally perceive ethics. Usually when we think of ethics and morality and law, we think about, I shouldn't punch you in the nose. Most of us, well, most of us, but some of us in this room are old enough to remember the blue laws in Indiana, where if you're going to buy gas on Sunday, you had to make sure to do it between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, right? Because the gas station was only open. And I remember as a kid that it was only at 46th and Norwaldo that the pharmacy was open for only a few hours. Do you remember these sort of things? No, you don't. You're not as old as I am. Well, that's what you get for being 70, isn't it? But at least I'm not 77 like other people to whom I'm married. But you know, we remember these blue laws. Actually, there's a very blue one in Scotland that was still in place when I was a student, not on Liberal, but way up in the north, in the Highlands, you could be arrested for driving your car on Sunday. Yes, you could be arrested for driving your car on Sunday. Now, those kind of laws are structural. Do you sense the difference? It structures time or place or access or something. It puts in place a structure. And so the city of refuge, one thinks of the road system where cars are to drive on the right side, at least in America. It's a structural law, which guides my personal behavior. I mean, I don't have to do that, but I better do that. And that's the structure laid down, and we more or less accept, don't we? Except when you get to Britain. In terms of Mosaic law, perhaps the covenant also belongs here as a structural matter, but we have given it a separate heading because of its importance. Of structural law is reserved for our study of the Laws Constitution of Israel, where Israel's focus. So I'm just dealing with structural laws about the aliens. Very focused piece. There are much, much larger blocks of structural laws that lay down the Constitution for Israel in the socio-political, economic realm, especially Deuteronomy 16 through 18, but much larger than that, and we'll talk about that in due course. I've been reading and teaching the Bible for too long, and it's only very recently that I saw this. I mean, I've read it, I've seen it. Have you seen it? I mean, have you seen it? The alien is mentioned. The alien within your gates. Probably the alien that's embedded in the extended family structure and not this transient alien. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day. We're all the way back to Genesis, aren't we? And he made it separate. He made it holy. Now, if you're in the notes, I'm on page 2. And I've read the law to you from Exodus. Let me read the law to you from Deuteronomy. And if you'd like to turn there, that would be fine. Deuteronomy chapter 5. But I'll just read it from the notes. It's a little different. Observe the Sabbath by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath. Sabbath doesn't mean 7. Sabbath means to stop. The word 7 is a numeral, and it means 7. So on the seventh day, you stop to the Lord your God, and on it you shall not do any work. And here comes the grocery list again. And notice how it's in a descending order. Neither you, the head of the household, so it's spoken to him who's responsible for making sure that the bottom gets the rest, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your animals. Environmentalists, are you paying attention? I mean, what are we doing naming the animals in the midst of a moral law? Well, maybe there's something moral about the way we treat our animals. Nor the alien within your gates, so that your manservant and maidservant, and here Deuteronomy adds something which is implicit in Exodus and made explicit in Deuteronomy, that they may rest as you do. That's what the Sabbath is about. You don't do anything. You certainly don't go to the temple. There wasn't any. And you don't go to the tabernacle. It's probably 70 miles away, and besides, who knows where it is? It's moving around. So on the Sabbath day, you don't do anything. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath. So there's a different grounding in this one, and we'll talk about that. And they both are relevant for the alien. You almost wonder if they're both included because of the alien. And then this passage here in the book of the covenant says, and we haven't come to it yet, we're a little bit ahead of the story, 6 days do your work, but on the seventh day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the slave born in your household and the alien as well may be refreshed. And we'll come back and work on that text in a little detail in another talk. Since we shall return to the Sabbath later and have already looked at it in the Ten Commandments, here we only note that the alien, along with the manservant, the maidservant, and the animals, is included in the rest. This is surely a deliberate move so that those on the margins do not end up working on the Sabbath. When we moved to the Philippines as young missionaries, rather idealistic, we went to church one Sunday and we were talking to fellow missionaries whose names I don't remember and faces I don't remember too. We said to them, we're going to go home and fix our lunch. And the other missionary said, our katulong, our manservant, maidservant, has our lunch waiting for us. We were aghast. We just couldn't believe it that this missionary had kept his servant at home cooking lunch during church time. I'm going to leave it at that. But, wow. Wow, huh? They too, maybe they especially need rest. I mean, they do need rest. It's the people at the bottom who care. I mean, you see these 10 guys out digging a hole in the highway, don't you? There's the supervisor, the assistant supervisor, the deputy supervisor, the supervisor in training. There's a guy with a couple shovels, and then there's some sap down in the hole. He's worth, right? And I've been there, and maybe you have too. I mean, I was the sap at one time. And I looked up out of the hole and saw all those supervisors. Who needs the rest? The supervisor? Give me a break. Yeah. No. And so the law goes out of its way to protect the guy down in the hole who's really doing the work. Huh? The grounding of the Sabbath commandment, first in the act of creation, in the Exodus account, then in the Exodus event in the Deuteronomy account, is significant in both cases for the alien. Maybe it's there especially for the alien. By grounding the Sabbath in creation, it means that the Sabbath is for all humans, which would include the alien. The Sabbath is not peculiar to Israel. That is, it wasn't given just to Israel. It goes all the way back to the beginning, right? Extending the Sabbath protection to the alien is not really an extension when viewed from the perspective that the Sabbath was part of the creation for all humans. Remember, Israel was keeping the Sabbath before the law was given in Exodus chapter 20. That is, Israel gathered manna for 6 days, but not on the Sabbath in Exodus chapter 16, on their way from Egypt to Mount Sinai. They were already practicing the Sabbath. So the Sabbath, like some other laws, is it's whatever you want to say, codification, revelation, or something, and it goes all the way back to Genesis, and therefore it's for everybody. Secondly, in Deuteronomy, the Sabbath is grounded in the Lord's deliverance of Israel from Egypt. The Lord delivered Israel from Egypt and from being aliens in Egypt so that they could be free and native-born citizens in the promised land. The Lord does not want to recreate in the promised land a society like the society where slaves and aliens are oppressed. The promised land is not to be a new Egypt. The promised land's not to be a new Egypt. The abused is not to become the abuser. Now, I've got a sentence in here, and it's more for fun than for anything else, but I'll just read it to you. Don't take it too seriously. I find, as an American, I find it strange that our country should call part of itself New England. I mean, my ancestors escaped from prison in York so they could come here and be something other than England, right? With a king and taxes. But we call it New England. The Lord said, not so much concerned about England, but not a new Egypt, with its hierarchical society, with its wealthy priests oppressing everybody beneath them. No. This is not to be a new Egypt. We have studied the laws above and concluded that by comparison with the other laws of the ancient Near East, Israel, and I've tried to say this very carefully, was moving in the direction of creating a different kind of society. Now, I've said that because it's not there. But it's moving, isn't it? When C.S. Lewis, in the sidecar of his brother's motorcycle on the return trip from the Whipsnade, I think it's called, zoo, decided that there was a God, he had moved from being an atheist, but he wasn't a Christian, right? But the important thing is where he was going, right? There were other people who had been Christians who were going this way, and they may have met in the middle, but that's not what's important. It's where you're going. And Israel is moving away from oppressive structures. There are some bits and pieces left behind, and it deeply troubles me that Leviticus 25 talks about buying and selling chattel slaves just as it troubles you. But they're moving in a direction that is the other direction from which Egypt is moving. Does that make sense? So I take comfort in that. One could not strike a chattel, and I'm going to talk about the movement now. One could not strike a chattel slave, and Ray just asked me, is there someone beneath the alien, the resident alien, and even the transient alien? And there is, the chattel slaves. I mean, I think they really are at the bottom. The female chattel slave has to be the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. It's a little hard to get all the ranks just right, but surely that's right. One could not strike a chattel slave in the eye or the tooth, male or female, and get away with it. We saw that in the Book of the Covenant. One certainly could not kill a chattel slave with impunity. Saw that in the Book of the Covenant. And runaway chattel slaves were not to be returned to their former masters. There's a specific law in the ancient Near East that you have to return the slave. So this is absolutely contradictory of the wider culture. Admittedly, Israelite law was still had one very minor provision for buying and owning chattel slaves, the Leviticus passage, but this was not the dominant pattern in the new society with aliens. The matter is much clearer than it is about slaves. Perhaps, and I don't know how you'd prove this, so I got to use the word perhaps. Perhaps because there are many, many more aliens than chattel slaves in ancient Israel, and I can't go and prove that to you. I'm not sure how I would prove it, but just looking at the text, I infer that. And therefore, there are many more laws about the aliens than chattel slaves. We've said that before. The number of laws about aliens far outnumbers the laws about widows, about orphans, and about the poor. Aliens are to be under the same law as the native born, beginning with the fourth commandment about the Sabbath. Israelite, alien, and slaves were to rest on the Sabbath. Baker, who speaks of the Sabbath as a holiday, he's British, so he uses that jargon, reminds us that none of the ancient Near Eastern laws made provisions for holidays, and that the Sabbath is unique in the ancient Near East, and he specialized in this, so I'm citing his. We shall have much more to say about the Sabbath when we come to the Constitution. Let me just say by way of footnote, my thesis will be that the Constitution, that the foundation of the Constitution is the fourth commandment. 1, 2, and 3, right with God. 4 on down, right in society. The Sabbath is the foundational structure. It structures time and actually works out so it structures possessions in such a way that the Sabbath day, the Sabbath year, and the Jubilee are actually the foundation of the Constitution. And we'll talk about that in great detail. So you're going to hear an awful lot about the Sabbath because it's so very central. Now, rest for the alien on the festivals very quickly here. I've listed the passages. Beside the weekly rests, there were also 3 annual pilgrimage festivals when all the males and almost everyone else in Israel went to the tabernacle. Now, not the temple. There isn't any temple for 400 years. For a week-long celebration. We shall not try to spell out any of the details about these celebrations, but only note that the aliens were included. I'll read you the text in a minute. Such inclusion would allow them rest. You couldn't go out and weed when you're down at the tabernacle. Food, socialization with others. Maybe this is where they met other people of the opposite gender, what have you. Okay? I don't know where you meet these people. Can't meet them in Sunday school. And an opportunity to learn about the Lord and to worship Him, which is, of course, the foundational part, the Passover. But it was quite a bundle. We have already seen that the alien, if the household is circumcised, is allowed, but not required, to participate in the Passover, which is part of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. And I quote here from this passage, "An alien living among you who wants to celebrate the Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised, then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised may eat of it." That's the boundary marker. The same law applies to the native born and to the alien among you. So that's Exodus 12:49, which probably really is the foundational text out of which all the other texts perhaps spin out. For whatever reasons, and I don't want to take time to think about this here, Exodus 23 and 34, along with Leviticus 23, which are also festival texts, do not specifically mention the inclusion of the alien in the feasts. Deuteronomy does. And oh man, there's all kinds of articles and essays and books spun off about how this happened. I'm only concerned with the canonical story and leave it at that and not try to figure out how all the sources got compiled and so on and so forth. That's certainly beyond me and I think probably beyond what we need to pursue. Perhaps in light of the inclusion of the alien at the Passover in Exodus 12:49, we are simply to assume that they were to be included in the other festivals mentioned in Exodus and Leviticus. if they are included in this most fundamental of all celebrations. To me, that seems like a logical inference. Whatever may be the explanation, when we come to the list of festivals in Deuteronomy 16, which we'll come back to when we look at the Constitution, beginning with the Feast of Weeks, the alien is mentioned in a very detailed list similar to the list of the fourth commandment. I read to you Deuteronomy 16:11. If you'd like to turn to Deuteronomy 16, we're going to look at some Deuteronomic texts here. And rejoice before the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name, you, the householder, your sons and daughters, your manservant, your maidservant, the Levites, now there's a new mention in your towns, the aliens, the fatherless, and the widows living among you. In the next feast, the Feast of the Tabernacle, the list is repeated, and I've made a mistake here in the text, strike out but and say, and again this time with the Levite included, the Levite in text included in both. And we read the text, be joyful at your festival, you, your sons, your daughters, your manservant, your maidservant, the Levite, the alien, the fatherless, and the widow who live among you. And then finally, one more time, Deuteronomy 26, in connection with bringing the first fruits, which we looked at last week. You and the Levite and the alien among you shall rejoice in all the good things the Lord your God has given to you and to your household. Presumably the sons and daughters are not mentioned because they are part of the household, although they are mentioned elsewhere. And presumably the wife is not mentioned because she's considered as embedded in the male. I mean, that would be, I think, a logical explanation from within that. It's certainly not exclusion for some other reason. There are complexities here that we have passed over in silence so as to make the simple point that the aliens were explicitly included in the three annual feasts, the Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And again, we underscored that such participation meant rest 3 times a year, food, in some cases during a time of scarcity, you'd have food, including meat. I mean, there's a whole new book published by Nathan MacDonald on what do the Israelites eat. I think I've ordered the book, but I haven't eaten the book yet. But he goes out of his way to make the point is that in most traditional worlds, and this one included, eating meat was quite rare. It was a very special thing. I mean, you and I eat meat every day, don't we? But for them to come together and to eat slaughtered animals offered in sacrifice was quite a rare occasion. And I say this very carefully, but I think accurately. These festivals where you were invited to come and make offerings and a burnt offering, these were divine barbecues. These were divine barbecues. You haven't thought of it that way, have you? No, and me neither. You can almost smell them, can't you? Somebody was barbecuing in my neighborhood yesterday, and I thought, well, that smells good. I wish they would invite me. Yeah. These were divine barbecues, and the alien was invited to eat meat. Socialization was also part of this, with outside the normal scope, so socialization with other acquaintances. And of course, foundationally and most important, was access to the worship of the Lord at the tabernacle. That really is what held everything together. But it must have been all bundled together. I was raised at the Methodist Church down the street from here in a wooden clapboard building that I don't think could possibly seat more than 100 people, had a furnace in the basement which was dug out of the dirt, had an outhouse where Jimmy Peterson and I used to go and do things, and yeah, well, we can't say that, and had a pump well which a snake used to go down. It was really country. And we would come and worship the Lord at Christmas. And then somebody would open the window at the front of the church. That's back in the days when churches had windows. Remember that? Somebody would open the window and a reindeer head would stick in it. And we kids would go screaming and yelling because we knew that Santa Claus had arrived. And in he would come and we would each get a box of candy. Yeah. Now, some of you, yeah, 1 or 2. And I mean, it was the only box of candy we had all year. I mean, if you want to hear poverty stories, ask my wife about getting peanuts and $1 for Christmas. I mean, you know, it was and then we used to go out in the graveyard, because it's right in the graveyard. The graveyard's still there. My father's buried there. He's celebrating his 100th birthday today with a big cake in heaven, all right? Yeah. So we used to go out, and my cousin and Jimmy Peters and I, and sit on the stones and trade candies out of the boxes. And we would sing. It was all mixed together in my childish mind. Worshiping the Lord, reindeers coming through the window, eating candy, playing with my cousins and my best friends. It was all rolled together. That's what this was. You say, didn't they go and just worship the Lord? Yeah, sure they were. But afterwards, they went out and played hide and seek in the graveyard. And it was all and then about 4 o'clock, the parents called everybody back together, and we had ice cream. And then at 6 o'clock, we went back inside the church, and we sang hymns. It was all one piece. And that's what this was. Eating ice cream, barbecue, playing in the graveyard, worshiping Yahweh. Huh? All rolled together. And we have done things with this. If you were in Africa, you would know that going to church starts at 8 in the morning and you come home at 7 at night. You're a little tired, but you've had a good time. Third year tithe. Deuteronomy 14. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to look at that. I'm going to read it out of the notes, but it's nice to see it in the text itself. Tithes is a topic which we shall treat under the law's constitution for Israel, as it is intended to, at least partially, to structure behavior in society concerning the distribution of wealth. There were other mechanisms for the distribution of wealth besides the tithes, but it was one of them. Now, let me just say right up front that the word wealth is a loaded word. Wealth in traditional society has a very different sense to it than wealth in America. Wealth in America is what me as an individual, because I studied hard in university and graduate school and postgraduate school and postdoc school and 2 years of internship, wealth is what I earned by my hard individual work, and I'm worth whatever I get paid, right? Yeah, well, I suppose. And it's all in the bank, and it's all in dollars, or it's in numbers. Wealth in traditional society is usually the number of cows you own. Haven't you learned from Mahara Matsue? You do know Mahara Matsue, don't you? Mahara Matsue is one of the most important theological figures in the world. Number one ladies detective agency. You're looking at me as if you don't know about this book. That's homework for next week. Go home and read the series. And her father had all the cattle up in the post, didn't he? And he was considered wealthy. And when he died, she got all the cows, remember that? And she finally sold them and became wealthy. But if you've read the book or seen the movie, she's certainly not wealthy in any sense that we understand big-time wealth, is it? So, I mean, wealth means you have more than enough and you're not going to be hungry. Now, once in a while you get someone like Abraham and Job who seem to really be very wealthy. But if you understood Abraham, he had 318 servants with wives, with children, and of course you must remember it's not 1.6 children, it's 8 children, right? The birth rate in Africa is 8. So how many people did he have in his house? Well, if he had a birthday party, I mean, you do the math, it'd be a couple thousand. Couple thousand. And he had to feed them all, right? He had to feed them all. So he needed to have hundreds of sheep and cows, and he lived in a tent. His tent was no doubt a little bit bigger and a little bit nicer than everybody else's tent. So, you know, I don't want to take a lot of time helping you imagine your way back into that world. It's not quite the world of the Maasai, but it's approaching the world of the Maasai. They're considered very wealthy because they have these cows, but when you see where they live, you wouldn't really quite think that they were wealthy. Right? So wealth here, when we talk about the distribution of wealth, we mustn't imagine stocks and bonds and, you know, huge amounts of wealth and all that. No. We mentioned briefly the 2 references to the third year tithe because they include the alien along with the widow, the orphan, and the Levite. Here we go, Deuteronomy 14:28. At the end of every 3 years, bring all the tithe of that year's produce into the store in your towns. Now in the other years, you would have taken the tithe to the tabernacle. so that the Levites, who have no permanent allotment or inheritance on their own, and the alien, he's mentioned here, or she, the fatherless, and the widow who live in your towns may come and eat and be satisfied, and so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hands. And it's repeated in 26:12. When you have finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce in the third year, the year of tithes, you shall give it to the Levite, the alien, here he is again, the fatherless, the widows, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Then say to the Lord your God, isn't this interesting? Here's one of the rituals in Israelite religion. You go and say before the Lord your God with the priest standing there, I have removed from my house the sacred portion, and I have given it to the Levite, to the alien, to the fatherless, to the widow, according to your commandment. I have not turned aside from your commandment, nor have I forgotten any of them, the commandments. I have not eaten any of the sacred portion while I was in mourning, nor have I removed any of it while I was unclean, nor have I offered any of it to the dead. Now there's things that I'm not going to explain, but you can see some of the things he's saying. I have obeyed what God has said. I have done everything you commanded me. Specifically here, I've shared it with the alien, along with other things. Although tithing as a tax is well known in the ancient Near East, there is nothing in the laws or apparently in the practices of the ancient Near East about setting aside a tithe for the alien on the third and sixth year, not to mention the widow, the fatherless, the Levite. This is another piece of unique legislation in the Mosaic law. Now, let me just simply explain how the tithe system apparently works. This is not in the Bible, but the rabbi certainly took it this way, and I don't see how you take it. You have the first year, the second year, you take your harvest and you bring it to the tabernacle. You do the same thing here with your harvest. You bring it to the tabernacle. On the third year, you take your harvest and you take it and you leave it in the town for all these people. Then you have the fourth year, the fifth year, they go to the tabernacle. The sixth year goes to the town. The seventh year is the Sabbath year. There isn't anything to go anywhere because you didn't plant. Right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, rest, and you start the cycle over again. That's the way it's presumed to have worked, and I don't see how else one might conceive it. There is a huge debate about when the tithing laws in general, along with the third year tithing law, developed. That's another technical matter which I won't deal with, but we simply take the text as it stands in the story in its canonical form. The tithe of the third year is presumably the regular tithe and not an additional one. Now, there is some debate about that. Also, it is presumed that the third year tithe was to be understood in a 7 sabbatical year cycle in which the tithe for the alien and others would be set aside the third and sixth year, and the seventh year would be a sabbatical in which nothing was directly produced, no planting and harvesting, therefore nothing to tithe. The usual tithes, first and second years, were to be taken to the place where he would choose as his dwelling for his name and eat in celebration before the Lord, and the alien is part of that, of course. This eating of the tithe before the Lord in itself is amazing, and I'm getting a little off the story here telling you this. We must return to it later, but Altman, in a brand new book, provocatively declares, the Israelites are to eat their taxes. Oh, that is a bit provocative, isn't it? You took your tithe, you know this, and you went down to the tabernacle, and in a 7-year cycle, you did this 4 times, and you went to the tabernacle, and you gave a little bit to the priest and the Levite. They got a cut, but the bulk of it, you ate. Yeah, it's grace. When we get to the Constitution, I will discuss with you taxes and tithes in great detail. And it's just, oh my goodness. When we talk about tithes and offerings, it has nothing whatsoever to do with the Mosaic law. I mean, the tithes were very differently spent and proportioned and worked out. Oh, dear me, we'll have to look at that. In the ancient Near East, the tithe tax would go to the temple and or the king, certainly not to the ordinary citizen, and definitely not to the alien, the poor, and the widow. We'll talk about that when we look a bit more at the temple. On the 3rd and 6th year, the tithe was to be stored in your towns. Because Palestine is a dry climate, the food could last several years, so that it was not just the 3rd and 6th year that it was available to the alien, the widow and the orphan, the Levite, but probably all 6 years. They could probably keep this stuff dry and have it there for all 6 years. Why is the Levite included with these marginals? I mean, the Levite's mentioned here, isn't he? The answer seems to be that the Levites, like others mentioned, are dependent on others. I really mean sustenance here, not substance. They have no allotment or inheritance of their own. We shall return to this matter later and suggest as a hypothesis to be explored that the Lord deliberately made the Levites dependent so that they would stand in stark contrast to the independent, upper, wealthy, priestly class of Egypt. You had the Pharaoh, you had the priests, you had everybody else. Not so in Israel. The Levites were down at the bottom. They weren't as low as the alien. They did have homes. They had gardens, but they were dependent, as were the alien, the widow, and the orphan. Just very interesting, and I will come back and try to develop that a little bit with you. Goodness, I've been a Levite all my life, and I must confess I have grumbled a bit about it from time to time. I did have a short spate when I worked for Bethel and was non-Levitical and got a paycheck. But, you know, most of my life I've been a Levite, and if the tithes and offerings didn't come in, well, that's another story, isn't it? We shall return to this fascinating, complex issue of tithes and taxes when we look at the economic structures provided in the laws of the Constitution of Israel. All right, I'm going to stop there. I didn't even get as far as I thought. The covenant and aliens is not that complicated. Maybe we can breeze through it next week. It simply says that the alien was part of the covenant. The alien was part, and covenant here is the agreement between Israel and Yahweh, or really between Yahweh and Israel, that he would be their God and they would be his people, and they would enter into an agreement. That's what covenant means. An agreement that he would take care of them and that they would keep his stipulations of the covenant, which were the law of Moses. And the alien is included in that. The other thing I didn't say, and it's pretty simple, and I'll just rehearse it. Every 7th year, they read the whole law. And the alien was mandated to be there and to hear the law read because he's part of the covenant community. Now, the vexing problem is, did the alien have citizenship? I frankly think that's the wrong way of framing the question. It's like asking, were the aliens illegal and undocumented? There was no such thing in ancient world. They were just aliens. They were just aliens. I mean, they were all undocumented. Where would you get a document? And they were all illegal. I mean, what else would they be? I mean, you couldn't, you know, how could you become a legal alien? I mean, they were just aliens, right? And so I think in the same way you have this sort of thing. All right, let's turn the camera off. We got a little bit of time for questions and answers.